We are at the City Council Chambers, third floor, City Hall Annex on Monday, March 24th, 2025 at 4 p.m. Can we call this meeting to order, please?
I make a motion to call this meeting to order.
I second the motion.
Wonderful. All in favor? All right, let's start this meeting.
Whoops. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Happy spring. As we, last Tuesday, I presented in the 2025-2026 school department budget in greater detail to the City Council as part of their budget workshop. At the end of that presentation, there were a few questions, but in terms of guidance given, there was interest on the City Council side that the budget was too high and needed to be able to be reduced. I think they're looking at a combined net to taxation increase of 6.5%. And in order for that to happen, on the school side, there was interest in us reducing our budget by, reducing taxation by $800,000. There was also, as people spoke about that, I think there was a general consensus about the $800,000. I think there was also interest from some City Council members interested to see what that would look like, and that there might be also some interest in possibly an amount lower than that $800,000. So we knew that the budget that we put forward did have a healthy increase in both expense as well as taxation. But we also felt strongly that this was the budget that we needed to make sure to go back and do our work and meet the needs of our students and our staff and our community. We also know that for that budget, a lot of it was maintaining. There wasn't a lot of additions to that budget. So we did go to work. That was last Tuesday. We did hold an A-team, an administrator team meeting Wednesday morning where we really dug into that in terms of trying to reduce our budget. We also had another school committee budget workshop last Wednesday afternoon to also share some of the updates with that. So I think we do have a plan for us as we go forward. If you want to go back and put up that next slide, Beth, thank you. This was the budget that we presented to the City Council last Tuesday. You can see our work that when it started with the school committee back at the beginning of February, our expense increase was 7.8%, taxation was 14.1%. I want to point out that for every 1% of expense, it equals 3.2% in taxation. As you know, and if you've been following these workshops and presentations, we are a high receiver of state subsidy. You can see as we went through our budget process, both at the school committee level, as well as also as you get down into the City Council level, you can see initially we were looking to decrease the budget. That's when we did get our health insurance renewal. That bumped that up because it was higher than what we were had budgeted for. We were able to work hard with Harvard Pilgrim to bring that number back down by getting a no-bid lock-in rate as well as some different decrements to help bring those costs down. So ultimately, we did even have a health insurance savings from the original budgeted amount of 17.5%. So as I mentioned, what was presented last Tuesday ended up with a 7% increase in expense and 11.1% in taxation. So we went to work, and if you go to the next slide, Beth, we've got some recommendations to help meet the what the City Council has asked us to do. These, I want to let people know that these are presented not in a random order. They're not presented in a alphabetical order. These are presented in an order from what we would consider what we would cut first, And then each reduction after that would be one that, if we are looking at impact, all of these are going to have an impact on our school department, but the longer you go down the list, that's when you're going to see probably the greatest impact. And that's something that is more of like a order of importance in terms of priorities, in terms of what we're looking for to be able to cut. So the first one is the paid family medical leave privatization with the city. This is something that we've talked about in our workshops. As you know, the state of Maine has put forward a new paid family medical leave. That's where everyone is required to give 1% of their salaries. We share that. Half of that 1% would be provided by the employee and half by the employer. That's something that the state has already started collecting that money. They need to collect the money to build up the pool before it can be able to come back and be accessed. We started contributing to that this past January for the beginning of 2025. As we go through, there are different options as you do for that program. One of those was the ability to privatize and go through that yourself. Now, for us in Sanford, where we are both the school department, where we are a municipality, and with the city of Sanford, we both share the same tax ID number. So if that was going to be something that we were going to be able to have to do, it would mean both the city and both the school would have to be on board to be able to do that. Cheryl Fournier has worked really hard working with insurance agent for us to be able to really look into this and examine this proposal. I want to thank the city. They too have also been involved in this process. We had an initial meeting with that, and I think there were concerns about the program, especially coming from on the city side, that this would be something new. There were a lot of unanswered questions. There was also questions around workload and whether or not this would be in the best interests of both the Sanford School Department and the city of Sanford. We did have the agent come in. The agent is working with other schools, other municipalities. So they came in and made a presentation. That presentation was last week. That was last Monday. They came in to do that. Following that presentation, Cheryl and I met with the city manager and people from their finance team and their human resources team, came up with a list of questions that we had in terms of wondering about that. We then sent those questions back out to the insurance agent. They were able to kind of be able to work with getting another quote. Right now, we've received 2 quotes, and one of those, and we're still waiting on a third. And so there are a lot of questions back and forth. I'm happy to announce that we did meet this afternoon with the city manager and people from the Finance and Human Resources Department. We were taking the information that we received on the questions. We really dug into that to be able to look at the pros and the cons to this, because in essence, what we're going to be doing is, by not participating in the state's program, we do not have to start making those we don't have to start making those contributions now. And so those are, for us, is coming back into the neighborhood of about $146,000. And so that's a big impact when you're talking about a budget. That's $146,000 when that wasn't something that we were counting on before. So we did meet, as I mentioned, we would go over the pros and cons. And so based on the information that we have, we are comfortable in going forward, both the city and the school, to be able to do that going forward. So I think that is great news for the school department. There will also be a savings on the city side. That would be less because they have less employees than we do. But I think as I look at this, this is great news for obviously the school department. I think it's great for the city, but I also think it's great for our taxpayers as they come back to be able to look at it, that we feel like with the agreement that we've reached, that we're not putting anything at risk in terms of what we know about the program and the contributions to that. So we're comfortable recommending an amendment to the budget of $109,869.
Just a clarifying question. So when you were mentioning 146, that's in a combination of us and the city when you were saying that number?
Nope.
So 146, it was ours, but we won't have to start paying premiums until May of next year. So that's 2 months' worth of premiums we have to do instead of 12.
Okay.
So we get 109,000.
Thank you.
As I said, very happy with that because that was something that we knew was an option for us, and I feel good about the process that we went through and able to announce that. Cheryl, anything to add on that? Okay, so that's the first one of reducing. What we're going to do is, if you can bring in the next one, Cheryl, what you'll see is what we have is what the amount is. On that far column on the right that's us keeping total. Those are the adding up of the list so that you can see as you start to add these up, that's what the impact is going to be on the budget. The second one we have is pre-K partnership grant. This would be a partial continuation. This was something currently this year we do have a pre-K partnership agreement with the YMCA in Sanford. Steve and his team has done a really nice job working with that, working with the Y team. It's really something that I think our community should be really proud of. That was something that was started and front-loaded with grant funds. So we were wondering if there was going to be a continuation of this grant. We hadn't heard anything. And so what we had done was we had then built our budget, not with the grant, that for us to be able to support this program, it would have to be done on the state subsidy that we would receive from the 16 students that are in the program. And so as we looked at that, and there was a slide that I presented last Tuesday with the City Council that would show how that was going to be able to work out and for the math. It looked like in a lot of ways it was going to be a wash, except for there was a part there with the food coming back, knowing that it's an off-site program. We're working and still working on that to see if that can be something that would be rolled into our food service program, or if it is something that would have to be as a standalone. And that's where you're looking at the count. I think looking at the difference in terms of what subsidy wouldn't count. If we're able to get that food, you would actually see that the program was a savings overall to the school department. I don't think you would have anybody in our community or in the school department that would be not against this partnership. So we did get word last week that there was a meeting that is scheduled for tomorrow. And so with that meeting, they were talking about what there might be in terms of the current grant that we're in and what that might mean going forward. So obviously, that meeting is scheduled for tomorrow. That timing doesn't work great with us in terms of, hey, do we know, do we not know? So I did, I don't usually do this often, but I reached out directly to the Commissioner of Education for the state of Maine and for the Maine Department of Education, who I know personally, and she looked into it for us. And we're able to find out that as part of our meeting tomorrow, it's going to be worked out. But I think what we have is the understanding that we received was that there was an email. If you look at where the timelines and the dates are for these these funds for pre-K, the ending date on that is December 30th, 2025. So as we look at that, that is not for the whole year next year. It would be for half the year. And so we are looking at that we typically would get not the same amount of grant funds in the second year. There would be a reduction. So Steve and I looked at that feeling like what were we comfortable putting down as a number, understanding that they would not be able to give anything for the full year, but they would be giving us for those 6 months. So we were comfortable putting the figure of $75,000 up there that could go to be able to offset our budget when it comes to that pre-K partnership with the YMCA. Steve, anything in terms that I may have missed? As I mentioned, the meeting is tomorrow.
No, the meeting is tomorrow. I think the only thing to reinforce is that we are getting subsidy for this pre-K program. And so that's just additional grant funds that were going to be extra. So just making sure people are clear about that. So.
Okay, so right now, our plan is to go forward with the presentation to the city council tomorrow, but we'll know after that meeting in terms of more of a final number. As of right now, we're doing a placeholder of $75,000 for that. Okay, the next recommendation that we have is additional use of our unassigned fund balance. This is a recommendation that is coming from the city council. As you look at it, we've gone through with our fund balance, and our auditors have come back. We've had to, especially ever since going back that the state decided to fund education to 55%, we had used that increased subsidy that we received that year late in the process to be able to put that towards tax relief. And so that was something that obviously came in very helpful. It's been helpful because when you do that, hurtful in some ways, because when you do that, it kind of creates a cliff. Now, we were able to come in, especially through the pandemic, for us, as we looked at that, there were some savings that we were able to recoup for carryover, and we've been very intentional in terms of that carryover amounts. We've got 4 reserve accounts that we had established, and prior to this, there were never any things that there were actually any deposits or any carryover in those areas. But we've worked hard on those. The 4 areas that we have are, we do have a reserve account for special education. We do have a reserve account for health insurance. We do have a reserve account for fuel. And we do have a reserve account for capital programs. Those are the ones where you see some, there's usually, those can be kind of fluid, and you can, from any year to year, you can be able to come back and have a jump in those. Then there's also just what we call some of the unassigned fund balance. And so we know with the auditor that we've done, as you look at our report, you can see how we work, how we kind of match up with other schools, especially other similar schools to us. We've had to use that fund balance as revenue for us to be able to come back for our last few budgets. And so part of that is being able to manage where that cliff is. So as we come back, the number we've always looked at is 3% of our overall budget. As one of the city councilors pointed out, it's 3% of our overall budget, but remember, our overall budget also includes a lot of debt service for our construction projects that are, in essence, are a pass-through. So if you separate that piece out, you can then look at a 3% of what that overall budget would be. So when we do that, it is by using $300,000 more, that takes our 3% and knocks it down to 2.5%. Right, Cheryl? So that would be, as we come back to do that, I know one of the things that we've looked for is each month, we always do the financials, and we kind of show you how our budget's doing, and Cheryl does a nice job of kind of comparing us to where are we right now, how does it compare to actual, and how does it compare to a year previous. And so as we look at that, that's always a little bit tricky, right, as Cheryl points out, because sometimes it's on billing cycles. It's also how many times people get paid in a month to be able to do that. If you look at us right now, we are looking at probably less carryover than we've brought over in the past into the general piece of that. I point that out not as, I think that would be for us as we determine whether or not we want to use $300,000. To be able to examine it that way. Our recommendation is putting the $300,000 up there. That will then, between those three items, give us a total of just under $500,000, $484,869. Cheryl, anything to add about the unassigned fund balance? All right. Any questions from the school committee on unassigned fund balance? We can come back to that, but is there anything? Okay. We'll go to the next one. Oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to, what does that leave us for a total? 2-point-something%? Do we have that?
It'll be 2.5%
Okay.
or $1.6 million unassigned.
Okay. Now we can go, the next one that comes on is I mentioned the 4 reserve accounts that we come up. This rather than the unassigned, this is the assigned. And in that reserve account, we do have a small fuel one that's come up. Now, there are some parameters for us to be able to make sure when we can use that and when we can't use that. Initially, as we built our budget, it was something that we, based on what we had, was something that we were not going to use that. But as part of our budget process, we have removed the Lafayette carrying costs from our budget. We have turned that over back to the city. We voted to do that last spring, but this was something that we did formally in the budget process. And so by doing that, we are now eligible to be able to use the fuel reserves. And so as we look at that coming from the fuel reserves, it's $12,189. That gets us real close to that $500,000 mark in terms of reductions. Cheryl, anything to add in that?
Right, so the reason why that happened is when you had the full cost for last year's budget for having an occupied building versus having an unoccupied building for this current budget, it made it so that it was not eligible to have any reserves to be used because that savings actually offset this $12,000. So now that you take Lafayette out, it makes it so that we are increasing our fuel cost by about $12,189, which allows you to use reserves to offset that. Make sense?
Okay, moving right along, we'll now go to, we did look into some further reductions of salary and benefits for the position at the middle school. And so by doing that, looking at that and right-sizing that for what the position is in comparison to all of the others, we got a savings there of $5,063. Right along with that, we also continue to look at that and then reducing salary and benefits at the high school as we look at the particular position and the needs of those positions and looking at a request to cut $800,000 from our budget. We feel that this is warranted as well. So that's $2,119. As we go to the next one, we also, as we look at it, we also knew we put a priority on the positions in the what we had in the budget, as those are all necessary and very much needed. When you do that, you're also wanting to make sure of, wait a minute, you can't have all things. So as we look at that, it's giving us a closer look at our class sizes and also looking at our enrollments. And so we did look further at Sanford High School in terms of that. So as we were looking at class sizes, there can be an additional position there that we would come in to be able to reduce that for it. So that would be the salary and benefits cost as we look at that position. Next up on our list, we did request, there weren't a lot of new positions in this budget, but one of the new ones that we did request was an additional assistant director of special education. And so that was something that we felt was very much warranted. We also think it was supported when you look at the subsidy that we had received. That being said, when you do add a position to a budget, especially one that you're trying to reduce by $800,000, you have to look at that position a lot closer. And that's something that we did. We've had a special education advisory committee now that's been meeting for a couple years and doing a really nice job as far as looking into all aspects, all facets of special education and how we can deliver those services. As we know, the special education's costs and budgets, not just in Sanford, but throughout, are coming back and increasing, and they're very high. So the other thing that we looked at was we have a mandate by the state, by the Department of Education, that we have to assume the child find service responsibilities for 3 and 4-year-olds. And that's something that currently right now is covered by Child Developmental Services, and that's something that is separate from us. We have to be able to come back to have that done by the September 2028. And so I mentioned the Special Education Advisory Committee. One of the things that we've really been looking at is that transition for us to be able to come back and take those positions on, to take those 3 and 4-year-olds on as we come back to be able to come back and meet the services. We also know the Special Education Advisory Committee is also looking at services for our 18 to 22-year-olds as well. And it's something right now that as we try to find programming, we're also doing that where our funding is very much limited and only utilized through subsidy and pieces for that. So this was something that it wasn't something that was just a random, hey, let's just ask for this. It was well thought out. So as we look at that, one of the things that we've done, we spent a lot of time at our A-team meeting last Wednesday morning. We also, our Director of Special Education, Stacy Bissell, also came to the school committee workshop later that day to kind of explain, because one of the things that we're concerned about is how are we going to be able to continue to operate, continue to be able to meet services. And so we're comfortable knowing that this position is coming back to put that on our reduction list, knowing that at the same time, the need is not something that's going to disappear. We also know that we're probably going to be back here next year in terms of that position. In the meantime, we're confident in terms of what we feel with our existing resources. There might be some restructuring, some things that are coming back, so that for us, what that's going to do is it's going to allow both Stacy and our Assistant Director Tammy Delaney to also look at how we can be able to start to prepare for us to move in to take the 3- and 4-year-olds coming from Child Developmental Services, with the idea that we're not looking to wait to September 2028. We're looking to see if we can do that starting in a year from now in the 2026-2027 budget. Some of that has already started taking place. We have a lot of great work that's happening with our First 10 work, our pre-K program, as we start to be able to look that through. So that was something that, as we look at those circumstances with that, you're seeing that we are adding that position to the recommended budget amendments. We do that knowing that, remember, I talked about the priority order that these are in. You'll notice that this one is towards the end in terms of that, because of, as you look at it, once again, there is a need there for the position. When you add up that position, salary and benefits, $155,197, our added total now is $724,815. I think the other thing that this will be able to do is, in addition to how we're restructuring, it will also help us to be able to start to get ready for making sure that this position comes on, that it's absolutely going to be well planned, well designed for us to be able to come back in terms of really flushing that out in terms of what the responsibilities are and how we can know exactly what's the skill set we're looking for in that position. Because as I mentioned, Tammy Delaney, our current assistant director, she spends a lot of time working with CDS and a lot of time with those 3- and 4-year-olds that will be transitioning to us, whether it's through our pre-K program or into our kindergarten program with that. Questions? Okay. Yep.
So the reduction of the teaching position due to class size, that, I just wanted to be clear, that came late in the budget process. This wasn't like early on the budget process that you identified that, oh, there's some room to, this is at the very end, like this is like wringing the towel, getting the last drops out of the budget.
We did.
Request.
We went back again, and we were able to come back to say, as we look at this, knowing that this is what we're up against, we felt that this was the way. It's going to increase some class sizes. It's going to possibly reduce some sections. It's probably going to have some impact on that. But in terms of the position going away, we wouldn't be able to not offer something. It might be less sections to be able to do that. There may be some schedule implications for some of our high school students who are coming back to maybe look at taking that particular course. It may be something that I can't take it this year. I'm going to have to wait until the following year, for example, to be able to do that. Not ideal, but under the circumstances, we feel that it's necessary to be able to come back and do that.
I would just add, though, just because, you know, in the beginning, or I don't know, like whatever week it was, we had already, the high school is already losing another, we're not hiring, so their high school is really, in theory, losing 2 teachers.
Correct.
Because we're not hiring for one of the retirements.
Yep.
So that, that is an impact.
Yep. No, thank you, Amy. That was something that we had looked at once, and that's what we had recommended to come up with, and now we went back and, as you said, did another deeper look on that. Okay, now, we're not done, because right along in that same vein, we also went back to look at our enrollment, also at the middle school, and as we looked at that, we also felt like there's a small enrollment decrease there, but it gets tricky at the middle school because of, you're now talking about what you have for teacher certifications. You now have, in terms of what people are allowed to teach or certified to teach. And so as we went into that, we were looking at, there's a position there of another retirement that we're able to come back and be able to absorb that. Now, you'll notice where this is on the list. It's our last position on the list because this is the one as a priority. We also know that, yes, it's going to help us reach the city council's goal, but at the same time, we also know that this is going to be impactful. This is one that you're going to come back. All of those are going to impact us in some ways. That one probably comes back to directly impact students and staff on that piece, and that's why we have that listed where we do to be able to do that. But we also feel like it's necessary. I want to point out, this is something that is not new to us in Sanford. We've always paid attention to our enrollments so that you can see that for us, some of the sizes of our classes, some are really big, some are small. So we've tried to be able to always adjust that. And what that means sometimes is you have to move some of the teachers around. You have to come back to do those things. It wouldn't be our first choice, but that's the reality we have. We always want to come back to make sure that for our taxpayers, we're going to make sure that that's something that we're able to do. You don't always see that in other communities sometimes, that they'll come back and say, well, this year is just a small class with that, but eventually it will catch up. We're coming back to be able to move those. We also know our class sizes have reached the point where we had large class sizes in our district, and then the pandemic hit. For us to be able to bring kids back to school, we had to come back to be able to have smaller class sizes. We did that to make sure we could get our kids in school full time, but we also did that so for any learning loss, we knew that those class sizes were going to start to be able to increase. And where we are now is we are back to where those class sizes were prior to the pandemic, and we're also pushing in some situations where they could be larger with that. Steve, anything you want to add in terms of class sizes on that? But that's something that I know for us, it's not always ideal because I'm a teacher, I come in, I'm teaching a grade level, then depending on what the next year is, we might have to shuffle some things around and being able to do that. But those are things that in our district we've done, and that's not because we're not supportive of our teachers or we're trying to yank things around. We're trying to make sure that we're putting the resources where we need them.
Well, I just want to add, Matt, one thing we have not done is add regular classroom teaching positions in our budget for the past couple of years because we've been able to adjust enrollments based on where we're at. But I think where we're at now, our enrollments are really bare bones. They're really almost at capacity. So in terms of being able next year, in terms of we have an increase in enrollment at certain grade levels, we may be back asking for positions because we don't have the ability to absorb those anymore. With that. So when we look at the middle school, next year we have, I think the number is 270 projected fifth graders, not next year, but the year after, that are going to be moving up to the middle school. And so are we going to have enough staff to be able to accommodate that with the elimination of this position? So just important to keep that in mind.
That's one of those bubble classes. And one of the things that is going to be facing us as a district, as a leadership team, as a school committee, as an administrative team is, where do you put your priorities, right? We've talked about knowing that those class sizes are going up, but we've also been able to come back to allow us to also have some other very important and necessary resources for us to be able to come back and meet our students' needs in doing that. So, That is what we've come back in terms of what we have recommended. Some of that I thought was, as I know we mentioned as we met last Wednesday, we knew that first one, the PFML privatization with the city, we weren't sure of that one. So that was something, as you came back, looking at what we had put forward, it was a little bit saying, wait a minute, we needed more information to see if this was in our best interest. But as I mentioned, it was something that both the city and the school department are behind. And then we do have the pre-K partnership meeting tomorrow. Our hope is that is also going to be able to land us there and possibly even more money to be able to go offset that. And then you can see the list that we have. So when you do that, it totals out to just under $850,000. We've tried to prioritize those in an order that we feel meets the needs for us. We're open to any dialogue and feedback if people are looking at that approach or feeling like the list has to, some of the items on the list have to be able to move around for us to be able to come back. Because the expectation would be tomorrow to present very similar to what we do here. If you look at it, Beth, if you can go to the next screen, there's our list again. And if the school committee gives the thumbs up this evening about this direction, you will see that down at the bottom, we went from starting at a 7% increase in expense and an 11.1% increase in taxation to a 6.1% in expense. And that knocks taxation down to 6.3% in terms of if you're adding all of those recommendations and those amendments to it. Anything?
I guess, I was, for conversation, I guess, you know, I struggle with, I understand the rationalization for both the eliminating the request for assistant director of special ed, and I understand, you know, the points made about not replacing the teacher at the middle school. It does cause me like a pause, knowing that we are going to need a new assistant special ed director. And so, you know, we are, in my opinion, kicking it down the lane to next year, where next year is most likely going to be just as painful of a budget, and you know, what work could be done this year with a new person, knowing that, you know, there's just so much work to be done. You know, John and I are on the Special Ed Advisory Council, and there's just so much. And, you know, God knows what the new federal laws and everything else in the government right now with special ed, and I don't pretend to know all the details of all that funding, but knowing that, you know, there's potential changes coming our way, I just, I don't know. I pause about that one. You know, you guys are in the trenches and doing the work every day, so I trust you, but I'm pausing about it. And then, you know, not replacing the position of the retirement at the middle school. You know, the middle school has all of God's children's and all of God's learners in a regular ed classroom, and for the most part, and you know, they go to the high school and there's different levels of learners, and at the middle school, like 1 year below, they're all together in a regular ed classroom. And you know, that's not the school, in my opinion, that we should be increasing classroom sizes. But I also heard what you said, Matt, that we've got the bubbles, and the bubbles are not showing. I don't know. I guess I'm just trying to start dialogue. I mean, I hear what you're saying. It's just makes me pause.
I'd like to add just a couple things, because I think those are very good points. The state of Maine legislature, both the House and the Senate, passed a continuing service budget last Thursday, and Governor Mills signed it on Friday. And that largely maintains funding for state programs at baseline levels for the next 2 fiscal years. Okay? And with that, the legislature specifically approved, they added about $150 million in the budget to ensure that the state is going to meet its 55% obligation towards K through 12 education for the next 2 fiscal years. So when you look at that, that to me is coming back that we're looking at flat funding at a state level guaranteed. Now, I'm not in love with flat funding, but at the same time, when you look at options, that's definitely better than any reduction that may came. Right along with that, they're also continuing to provide 5% revenue sharing to local municipalities. Same thing, I think our city would need more, but at the same time, 5% level funding is better than coming back to be able to do that. And so I put that back in there that people can know on the state side. On the federal side, from all the information that we're receiving, that federal funding is expected to continue to flow to Maine schools for the time being. The federal funding that was already appropriated by Congress is expected to continue to flow through the end of Congress's fiscal year. And Congress's fiscal year is at the end of September 2025. We don't expect any slowdown in grant reimbursement or grant funding should move forward. What Congress did at the federal level, the continuing resolution continued to provide federal education funding at its current level. The federal formula funds have not been allocated for fiscal years beyond that. And, I think right now our hope there would also be to maintain level funding. We'd like to see be an increase, but there also could be the possibility of a cut. Also coming back through that's something that we're going to have to be able to stay tuned about that as it becomes available. But that's a state and federal, because we do get some questions about that I just wanted to be able to help people get an idea. Because Amy's right, as we look at this budget, just as if we're able to get this one through the city council and then we're able to have our citizens approve it in June, we can take a little bit of an exhale. But guess what? As we look at the funding and the challenges that are coming down the line, we know that the valuation in Sanford is going to continue to be able to rise, and that valuation is impacting our subsidy. So I think your point is, as much as we put things off, we're also going to have to be able to look at, when we do put things off, we're also going to continue to be in challenging budget times.
I hear you,
Who
Amy.
are you?
Oh, I'm Stacy Bissell. I'm the Director of Special Ed.
Oh, thanks, Stacy. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, it's been a day. And I hear that. I want you to know that Tammy and I were not dismissive about this, and very much appreciate looking at having another assistant director. I think for us, and we've talked at A-Team, we've talked with Matt and Steve, we've talked with Matt and Steve, we've talked with Matt and Steve, and next year, right, having that coming next year on a board, there's two pieces that sort of roll into it. The first one is, yes, it's really challenging in special ed, I think across the board everywhere, but we have had some pretty unique circumstances where people that are integral in the delivery of services have had some pretty significant health issues and have been out, and we've unfortunately had a couple people that have are no longer with us. And so I am hoping with everything I have in me that we don't have that experience again. We haven't really had it to this point in the 25 years I've been here. So there is a piece of that I'm like, okay. And we're getting our feet back under us because both of the IEP coordinators have returned. But the other part is for me, and I understand how challenging the budget is, but when we get to 26, 27, we're going to have a minimum of another 40 students. And at that point, the number of students we have in special ed, it won't be a position we can kind of do without. It's going to be critical, but it's also at the same time the state will be giving us funding. And so they aren't committing to what kind of funding, but there will be a portion of the funding that can support that assistant director position. So I so appreciate you being worried about it, because it's a beast, and we always say that, but there have been some unique circumstances this year that have started to right themselves in the last couple months, which then of course free up mine and Tammy. But as we look forward, like I just got the data, we have 32 kids that are graduating in special ed, and we have 64 coming up from the middle school. So what we're seeing is another bubble of identification, and a lot of that is going to be the expansion of 18 to 22. And so when we have really 20 years of educating students for 20 years, that subsidy will go up as well. So there's two pieces we looked at. an increase in the funding formula for special ed, and then the drawdown for preschool. So I just wanted you to know the thinking we had done.
And I'll jump in on that. Thank you, Stacy, because there's a couple things I needed to also be comfortable with. And one of those was, as Stacy mentioned, there's some restructuring that we can be able to do when we're coming back to be fully staffed that I feel is going to allow us to still put the time together that's necessary to look at the onboarding of the 3- and 4-year-olds. One of the things I've asked Stacy and Tammy to provide is, okay, we're looking at doing this change. I want to see an action plan in terms of a timeline for us to be able to come back and do that. And that sounds like, ooh, hey, the superintendent's demanding an action plan. No, what I'm doing is we need, for us to come back, there's something that we have to think this out so that we make sure that the resources and the time is available so that we will be able to come back and what I feel like is be better suited when we come back to be able to really, when we go for that position, I feel like it's going to be, we'll be in a better position as we look at coming back on how that can be, help with the 3- and 4-year-olds, but it's going to be more of a district-wide view on special education and how we can deliver services.
Sorry, thanks, Steve. We've kind of already started. Tammy and I just met before I got here, but we call it a roadmap. We just find that term better. And so then an action plan. Sorry, Matt. So we have that pieces started, and we are going to bring it to the advisory committee or council so that you can look at, because preschool is a whole separate beast. We don't, because my first thing is where are we putting them all? Like, where are we putting them? But you develop partnerships, right? So there are some preschool partnerships we've already reached out to. They've gotten back to us. They'd be willing to do it. So those pieces have started, and we're going to try to put it into a roadmap so we can just keep adding those pieces, and it will be what guides us in our work in terms of onboarding them.
I just want to say that, and I got this from Wednesday, you speaking, just, you're going to have a better job description. It's not going to be, the thing that really got me on holding off on this more than, obviously we need the support and we want to give you the support you need. It's just, when they come into the role, you're going to have everything already laid out and identified versus now, and you're like, never mind, you're not going to do that. Somebody else is going to, and you're kind of like creating almost another problem.
Yeah, we're very lucky right now. We have some really talented IEP coordinators who are going to be able to, and it's their area of expertise, step up and do other pieces that have been on my plate and Tammy's plate. And then it does really just tease it out, because it's a big ask and it's an administrative position and it will be desperately needed, but I want to make sure that we can explain to you guys first, and Matt and Steve, then you guys, then the community, kind of what we're looking at.
And I think we're well suited based, as challenging as this year's been out, because we've had some people who've been out and it's not like we can be able to replace those positions easily. So we've had to already start to be able to do some of this work, which I think is going to help be that natural transition for us to be able to kind of be that next step in between coming in and adding on to this adding this position. But I think it's clear, especially this evening in our community, and tomorrow night, that we fully expect that position is going to be, that ask is going to be coming back.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. You guys have done a masterful job. I just want to say, as we've gone through this budget process, finding areas of savings, finding ways that we can reposition things. I think this is, we go to the city council last week, and they say 800,000 and a very workable solution. And so thank you. You guys have done really, really well. I'm a new school committee member, and maybe for people that are watching from home, tonight we approve a budget, but it's really just a recommendation, correct? And the city council is the one that decides what the budget is. So like last week when they said take 800,000 off the budget, they're the ones that decide that, and we don't have much of a say in that. And so I just really want to be clear that we can make the recommendation, but they can always come back and say, take more money off, take more off, take more off, right? And there's a lot of power in that, right? And our budget gets voted on, the city budget does not get voted on. There's a lot of power in that body. And I do think it's important that any recommendation we make, that our opinion is voiced. So yes, they have the power to take 800,000 off of our budget. I think it was too harsh, too deep. I think 800,000 plus the 500,000 that we already had looked at is too much. And so, I've struggled, this is kind of different from last week, I've struggled with this over the weekend. How do I just don't agree with it. And the parts that I don't agree are the educational components, so those last three components. And if we want to back off the assistant director of special education, think we need more time, then I'm okay with not battling for that. But I think those two teaching positions, I would support a recommendation that if the council wants to take those off or eliminate that, then they do that. That we don't rubber stamp their, so I don't support them removing that teaching position and not replacing that teaching position. And that's kind of where I'm feeling right now.
Thank you, John. Just to kind of review the process, you're right. At the end of the day, what happens here is the city council, and we knew we were doing everything we can to hang on to a budget that was going to be able to meet the needs of our kids and trying to be able to hang on to services. And we knew that we did have a budget that had, a high impact on the taxpayer in terms of taxation and in terms of expense. That wasn't done for any other reason that we knew this was what we needed to be able to maintain what we were doing. And I emphasize that throughout. So the city council does they can't tell us what to cut or where to cut. They can set an amount for us. And what will happen that I anticipate is there'll be dialogue tomorrow night. I don't think you're going to see much from the city, but they do have something with their paid family medical leave on their end to come back a smaller number, but nonetheless, it goes towards reducing taxation. I expect to see that tomorrow night with some dialogue. The following Tuesday, April 1st, there's a city council meeting scheduled. And the city council meeting is where I expect them to have to approve a budget with us with a number on that. And that number is in the articles that we have of that budget is what is going to be going out to the June referendum. What we will do as a school committee is we'll have to come back at our April 7th meeting, anticipating, and what that number is. Remember, we approved a budget back in February with a number. Now we're going to have to come back with another formal approval of that number after the city council is done, because that's the role of the city council that they have in our process, that they can tell us an amount to be able that has to be cut. Our hope is, as we lay this out, you're going to see the order that we're laying those out, and an idea that our hope, too, is as we get closer to the bottom of that list, you're seeing a bigger impact that's impacting our students directly, impacting our staff directly, and impacting the school department.
Can I just add one more thing, Amy, to the... Yeah. So, yeah, I agree. Thank you. And that process, I think, is just knowing how that process works. That's enlightening for me. I've learned a lot just being on the committee, as I've expressed. But the one thing I can stress is that we pay, out of 24 towns or 24 school districts in York and Cumberland County, we pay the least amount per student. We're 24th out of all those districts. And so I think that says something, right? That says something about how lean we've been, right? And where we are, and the narrative that schools are costing a lot. These budgets are very lean, and we have to nurture and support those schools. And I'm ready to, just defend some of those educational components at the end of his list. And I think we can make the case to the council would support them as well. I mean, these are master-level jobs in our community as well. These are the kind of jobs we want in our community. If this was an industry, if this was a factory in Sanford that said, hey, we want to hire a master's level position to bring into your community, I think we would be bending over backwards to do that. And so I think the 500,000 or so is enough. I don't think we need to eliminate the educational positions as well.
Oh, go ahead, Melissa.
I was just going to ask that, but the middle school position, what does that do as far as class sizes go? Because you're saying, re-explain that to me. You're saying that the 5th grade class that's coming in is smaller.
This would be directed at 8th grade, because our 5th grade class coming in is a little bit smaller, but there's a massive 4th grade class right behind that. Right. So as we look at the 8th grade, typically what we've done there is our core teachers are content area teachers, and so we have 10 teachers, and this would be able to looking at moving down from 10, one was retiring, so that 10 would go to 9, and then there'd have to be some restructuring to meet the needs of the 8th graders through the 9th, through the 9 teachers to be able to do that. So you would see, in that particular way, class sizes would probably creep up a little bit than what they used to.
But comparative to other classes in the school. So that's what I'm saying is if you don't do that, is it at 19 for that grade and everybody else is at 25? Or,
Steve, can you provide some context to that?
With the cut to the 8th grade position, it takes the class size from 21 up to 23.4. So about 23, 24 in a classroom where we're at right now. Comparative to the other grade levels, it's comparative.
Yeah.
In 6th grade, we have 24. 23 and 7, so it's comparable to the other grade levels.
We have that one grade that is bringing a teacher with them, kind of, or something. Or I feel like from a year ago or so, we moved a 5th grade teacher.
And they won't see that effect till next year, you're
Right.
saying,
Yeah.
right?
And I just want to, I guess, just to add to this conversation, to do a shout out for the middle school teachers, because getting to my point earlier, they've got the melting pot in each one of those classes of 24, 25 students, different learners in each class, and they've got, 4? So on average, I have to guess, they've got between 90 and 100 students per day that they're teaching, which is much different than the elementary, that they're with the same students, get to learn them really, really well, their IEPs. The high school is a little bit different because we all know that those class sizes are definitely not there. They definitely don't have 90 to 100 students for the majority of them, right? So I have more sort of empathy with us making cuts to the classroom teachers at the middle school because of the amount of students that they see per day, and correct me if I'm wrong with my numbers, but 90 to 100 is what I'm gathering here, 80 to 100, whatever. But there's how many IEPs in those students, how many, so it does, I would be more comfortable doing a budget without that and bring to the city council 724, 815. That's just me. I'm looking for conversation from everybody here at the table. But I also respect what you're telling us, what you're bringing to us about the bubble and this and that. I get it. It's just, there's a striking difference with how much responsibility that they have with the different IEPs and getting back to the special ed and this and that, with all the different types of learning in those. Because again, they go to the high school and you've got AP students with each other, honors, college prep, applied, and such. So
Sure.
I'd like to have a conversation with everybody here on the panel to kind of give their opinions as well. Not to cut you off, Matt.
Yeah, no,
I'd love
that's
to hear
fine.
from you as well, but I'm.
Yep.
Conversation. Sorry, Matt, go ahead.
I was just going to say, one of the things that we do at the middle school is there's the teaming concept, learning communities. Yeah. So when you have a group of teachers that are with that large number of students you talked about, but they're kind of contained to that, so they're not similar to jumping over. It doesn't make it. It's still challenging. But now that way, you're now working on keeping people into a particular learning community. Now, some of that gets tricky because then you have, for example, upper level math, and you kind of have to cross some of that pieces. So when you get to middle school programming, as you've done a good job of kind of highlighting it, I can't, all I can say is ditto in terms of looking at that. But there is that teaming concept, which I also think is so critical to us at the middle school, to be able to help us be able to have the same kids working with the same teachers.
Lisa, Paula, is there anything that you'd like to add? Not to put you on the spot, but I did. Just kidding. Or Melissa or John, anything else to add?
I'm just sitting here looking at this list, and I appreciate so much the work that you, Matt and Cheryl and everybody at Central, Steve, Beth, all of you have done, trying to come up with this giant $800,000 number that we're supposed to reach. I personally have issues with everything that has to do with education, like John mentioned. I'm really concerned about the middle school. I'm concerned about the $300,000 for the unassigned fund balance, which is going to lead us to that cliff at some point. I sit here and I feel like my hands are tied because on the one hand, we've sort of been mandated to have this, to cut 800,000, right? And you all go and you crunch numbers and you try to figure out a way of doing it. I'm wondering, at what point is it enough? Every year, it gets harder and harder to meet the demands of the budget and the demands of the tax number that we're trying to reach, or that the city council is trying to reach, and I appreciate it. I'm a taxpayer here. But there's also the piece of we're here to support education, and one of the best ways to grow a community is to have the best education possible. And make no mistake, we've got excellent teachers in all our schools. We've got excellent administrators. We do a tremendous job. They all do. But at some point, you got to have enough in order to give back. So it's concerning. So I guess my question to the city council would be, what's next year going to look like? Because next year it's going to be worse. I've been on the school committee for, what, Amy, is this our fifth year? Fifth year. And every year we've been talking about this cliff. And although, COVID kind of threw a wrench in everything, I'm seeing that cliff come up. And last year I could say, I got a couple more years, we can squeeze a little more. But next year, I'm afraid for next year, looking at this. And I also have an issue with the 800,000 specifically because I understand, and I've heard over and over again, that the city council is not supposed to tell us what to cut, that they can only suggest, numbers, but we still get told, and it's still said out loud in meetings. And while I can appreciate that people on the city council understand school budgets because they've either been involved in them before or have had lots of kids in the school system. I think just by specifically mentioning things that we should cut paints the school committee and the district in a bad light, as if we're not doing our job, or more importantly, Matt and Cheryl and everybody isn't really doing their job. And I think they do an excellent job. So if you guys say that you want to fight it, I'm right there. If you guys say that we have to do this, then we have to do it. But I guess I just want to throw it out there. Next year, that's it. There's nothing. There's nothing left to cut. Nothing. And everybody needs to hear that. That's what I've been thinking.
I think Paula's right. I mean, at some point, there's nothing left to cut. And I don't know when we reach that. Is that today or is it next year? I think that's the only decision to make. Is it now or is it next year? I think the difference between, 21 students per class and 24 students per class, I don't know if that's where we want to draw that line, or do we wait till it's between 24 and 25 students per class? Where do you want to draw that line in the sand? But we got to decide where we're going to draw the line. Some of the other cuts, is that where we're going to make, is that where we want to decide? Is it going to be students per class? Is it going to be numbers of teachers? Is it going to be, where is that? Where do we want to say this is the hill we die on? Because they're going to keep saying cut, cut, cut because they're just looking at dollars. And we have to be the ones that stand up and say that it isn't just about dollars, it's about the quality of the education, because that's what we are here for, is to decide what the quality of the education is for our students, and you have to find the funding to do that.
Yeah, well said. I think as I look at this, the challenge is, I think that the process that we have is the process that we have, and I think we have city councilors at the end of the day that I think they understand the value of education. I think they want to be supportive of schools. So when they're talking about, you're always trying to say, hey, try to keep a certain percentage increase out of your mind, because once you say that, you're kind of tied to that. And so what I see a city council looking at is, I feel like they're looking at general ideas about what it would look like and an idea of kind of communicating, all right, what's that impact going to be? And so tomorrow night, as we come back and go through the list, I will try to do my best to present what that impact is going to be, because I don't look at it as a city council overstepping their bounds. I think before they give they could give a random number and just be done with it. But I think they want to try to get an idea. If we're looking at this as a number, can you show us what the impact is going to be? And we know that through that is, especially when you start getting into the classroom setting, you're now talking about class sizes going up, positions being eliminated, work that's already challenging becoming harder with that. And no one, I don't, you don't, no one wants that in terms of what we're looking for. So I think that's going to be kind of the intent, is how we've done it this way to prioritize that. It sounds like there is interest, especially in those last three positions, where they are. I'm a little unsure about the fund balance, right? Because I think there's people, as we look at that, that's just more of us being able to absorb and impact any potential problems or issues that come up, because we don't have a budget that's heavy. There's no contingencies in our budget as we look at that. So that's how I think we've focused the structure of this. I don't know if the school committee has some other recommendations in changing that order in terms of how we can come back to be able to lay this out, or how I can lay this out.
So I guess the question at hand right now is, are we in agreement for Matt to bring what he has brought to us tomorrow to the city with I don't have the percentage in front of me. If you can go back to that slide. Yeah, 6. So the amendment of 2, okay, thank you. So the 6.1 of 6.3 taxation, is that what we are in agreement with? Are we in agreement of bringing that down? I'm going to give a couple of scenarios, so just bear with me. So the one that's presented with a 6.3 taxation, so that's number one. Number two, do we discuss bringing that down to 800 even and taking a little bit less out of our unassigned fund balance? That would be kind of number two, right? Because to me, 45 or almost 46 grand, that's a half a year of that's an ed tech. That's you know what I mean? Like, that's a position that we could use, or lights, or whatever else is coming our way. That's a half an interpreter, you know what I mean? Like, we just don't know who's coming at our door tomorrow. So I'm hesitant to just go above what we were required to do or asked to do. That's number 2 for me. And then number 3 for me would be curious where you all are at if we were to go with a budget tomorrow, leaving in the middle school teacher and bringing them 724, 815, which is close enough to the 800 in my opinion. So those are like sort of the 3 scenarios. I'm just curious where you all are at.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
What about the first 2 items? How sure are we on those? Those are still really in flex, right?
We are sure of the first one.
We
very
are sure
confident.
on the
Yep,
first
that-
one.
based on the meeting that we had today.
Okay.
That one I am. The second one, not as confident as the
Sure
first
until
one.
tomorrow.
We won't know until after that meeting in terms of trying to get a structure. And that's probably, Lisa, in some ways where you're looking at the 845, 653, some of that may be mute in the point that if that 75,000 is less than what we've anticipated.
Got you. And I do want to just, sorry, you just made me think of something. I do just want to, Cheryl, was it you or was it Matt? Which one of you gets the credit for bringing this privatization with the city to us? Is that you? You? Who was it? I want to give you both, whoever it is, because that shows the real digging that we have done, we, meaning you, have done to try to find that is a savings of a teacher. And like, I can't even thank you enough because that's a lot of work that you've done to find that money. And I just want that to be shouted from the rooftops.
Thank you. What I would say also is if you remember through our process, that was something that we identified early. So when we were starting to look at our cuts, that was one that we felt didn't impact the classroom directly. Right. So that was something that we would put out there, and then it was something that we couldn't be able to capture those savings until we were able to go through the process because it's something the city and school have to do together. So I'm confident in it, but I'm also appreciative of the city also coming back to be able to look at it because that was something we'd been holding out. Even if you go back to the next slide, we would have had that 109,000 all the way up in there to lower it down. We were kind of holding on to that until we were able to get some confirmation, and I think we were a little bit worried, whoa, we might not get that in time, but we were able to do it. And better late than never, right? Because at the same time, it's more about the process is where we start, it's more about where we end up.
I just wanted to, sorry, before you guys go around with your 1, 2, 3 or your additional one, just to know that if we were to keep a middle school and keep that in, that was a senior teacher that's retiring. So most likely that 120 would not be, assuming that we probably would not be hiring such a senior teacher close to retirement, that number would be significantly, I'm assuming, lower. We might even get a teacher who's still on the parents' insurance, and so we're looking at, $68K. So we might even be closer to 800 with that, and that's just, I just want to add that caveat to it. All right, knock yourself out. 1, 2, 3.
That would be accurate, correct? Yeah, as we look at that, that is currently where you'd be looking at, by having the position, there'd be some savings there.
So I guess we could theoretically decrease that amount, knowing that you probably would bring somebody in not as senior on the listing.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just be curious what that number would look if you were to just change it. So like, I don't know what a teacher with 5 years experience looks like on the pay scale of how that changes, but I'm pretty sure it's not near 120.
I think it's like 90.
Okay, so less 30. So then it would get that, it would make it more to 750, which is closer to 800 than it is, so, sorry.
And just so people know, we're not padding anything here. One of the things that we've done in the Sanford School Department, and I'm proud of this, is when it comes to our hiring, we hire the best candidate. Yes. We're not hiring the ones that's the least expensive, okay? Right. So you could, but what I say that is you oftentimes, for us, we will build in probably somewhere that meets in the middle. It meets in the middle in terms of experience and meets in the middle in terms of health
Health
insurance.
insurance, yeah.
Because if we do kind of say it at that low level, then it kind of limits who we can be able to come back and attract. So I just wanted to be able to put that.
Amy, can you just repeat the three choices again? One was,
keeping it as is, as to what they just brought to us, so keeping it at 845, 653, so the taxation would be the 6 point, they keep messing me up there, but 6 point, whatever, Melissa
Right.
has it.
It's just going to fill the back.
It's, oh, sorry, so 6.3 taxation, or we go to the city council and with an 800 even, so we would move that 45 back into the unassigned fund.
okay,
And then number 3 would be keep the middle school teacher and bring them a budget of roughly 750, of cutting 750.
okay.
And obviously open to any other things, but it doesn't seem that anyone else had anything they felt strongly about.
I would be in favor of keeping both teaching positions, so the Sanford High School position and the middle school position. So
So when I did quick math,
it was 108, the one that I would support would be 186,000 roughly. So the two, I am reluctant to back off of the new assistant director of special education, because as we pile up these things down the road, right, it's going to be more and more expensive, right? So we're already talking about things that we're,
Extra funding for it next year.
we hope, right? But we're also, assistant athletic director, and that's assuming that our facilities are, everything is just working as it should, right? I mean, I think for the sake of moving it along, I'll back off that, and especially after what you said. But those two teaching positions, I think they're important. I think the city council will support education in our community. I think they do support education in our community. I think they can see the full list. They'll see that the 845 is what it is. But I think they'll see that those two positions are important as well.
Well, we had class sizes at the high school that were like 10, 11, 12 students, so that was where you've got 24 students per classroom in the middle school, and here you've got these, I think that, but for the middle school position, I'm sorry, Steve, I'm going to keep coming back to this. 8th grade for me, it doesn't warrant larger class sizes versus 5th and 6th grade, so, that's... What are the class sizes of the younger, because the younger kids obviously have more transitioning to do, more growing to do.
So you're asking K through 4?
No, I'm still saying keeping it at the middle school, but is the 5th grade 25, like Lee said, I don't know changing from 22 to 24 in 8th grade is going to be anything that's, for me, I'm not going to impact a taxpayer over a couple of students per classroom in 8th grade. But how are we looking in the younger?
So I'll just say so grade 5 right now, 21, 22, grade 6, 24, 25, grade 7 would be 22, 23, grade 8 would be 23, 24. And keep in mind, these are just projections. These numbers can change. Keep in mind also next year, when we look at the number of, we have 211 8th graders projected for next year. The year after, when that next 4th grade group comes up, there's 269. So we have about, quick math, is that about 50 more kids coming into middle school the year after? So that was that bubble I talked about that's coming into the middle school next year.
And so the other thing I want to add, because there's student to teacher ratios, class sizes, and those are impactful to our teachers. That's important. But I also want to point out in this particular case, and I try to look at this through the lens of all of our stakeholders. What if I was a student? What if I was a parent? What if I was a teacher at the middle school? Now what happens with reducing the teacher, you're also now having a teacher, for example, might be teaching additional subjects that they weren't teaching before. They may be moving between grade levels so that we can be able to make this all work. And so at the end, we've got good teachers with that, but I also know in some ways that could be an impact as well. And we're sitting here with that balance ultimately to say what is in the student's best interest. And sometimes when you're now looking at reducing staff at those levels, you're also, there's domino effects to that also are coming in to now say, wait a minute, I was this teacher teaching this content area. Now that we've lost a teacher, I'm now also picking up another section of this that I wasn't. Or I was in 8th grade, now I'm teaching some 8th and some 7th grade. So I'm not trying to freak out our middle school teachers, but that is another piece that we're looking at to be able to try to balance that, in addition to the class sizes, which are impactful as well. If we look at the middle school, Cheryl crunched some numbers, because remember, with that position that we had up there for $120,838, we could keep that position, and that would save us $21,405. Okay? So,
Then it would bring us to what?
So that would bring you, if we put that 120 back in and take out the 21,405, that would bring us to a 6.3% and 6.9% in taxation.
I'm sorry. To leave the middle school teacher there.
Yep.
we would leave it, no, it would still be on the list, but it would be on the list instead of for $120,838, it would be on the list for $21,405.
Yes.
Savings due to that.
Yep. Correct.
21 what again?
21,405.
So I'm just curious what everybody else is thinking. 1, 2, 3. So Melissa, it was hard for me to gather what your bottom line is there.
Let me, sorry. Sorry, you're going to kill me.
You're good.
I know. But, so what that does is, remember the number we were looking at, if we were able to keep the middle school teaching position in there, the number we were looking at was 724. We now, by keeping the middle school position in there, we can now make that number 740, yes.
Five,
Okay, so instead of being at 845 or 724, we're now at 7,
No, it's only a $20,000 savings. So you'd be at 824, is that right?
No, you'd be at 745-ish. So take the 724. Take the
So I just say
7.
that, I think one of the options was leaving in the middle school teacher. I think that was option 3. If you did that, your savings would not be the cut would not be 724,815, it would be 7 what?
46,220.
746,220.
And that would bring us a taxation of what again?
6.9% taxation. 6.3, sorry. Dyslexic today.
So where I'm just going to go down the line. So Melissa, where are you at?
Well, that's a tough one. Again, I think class sizes in 8th grade being 20 versus everybody else, I guess I would be at the 6.3% original.
So the original one of 845, 653? Okay.
Option 1.
Option 1.
Yep.
I say yes to option 3.
So just to be clear, that's keeping the middle school teacher?
Yes.
Okay. John?
Option 3 plus keeping that high school position, the $65,000 one. So I mean, I don't know if that's an option.
I had that as option 4, leaving in both teaching positions.
Yeah, okay, I'm option 4 then. I'm sorry, I didn't write down that quickly enough.
Wait, if we're going to, I'm so sorry, Lisa, if we're going to do that, can we know what the numbers are then?
It's 186,000 off of 845.
I mean, tax and expense.
So then you're adding, so from the 746, 220, then you're adding 65, 378. Adding.
Hold
Oh,
on.
sorry, you're right. Adding.
I'm asking because I was an English teacher and a Spanish teacher, not a math teacher.
So that
I'm
would,
an English major too. Yeah.
that would be a 7.3% taxation and 6.4% expense.
and with option 4, begrudgingly giving up that
6.4.
assistant director of special education, begrudgingly, and I'm hoping that the council will see that has real value and that we can't keep passing these things down the chain. We're going to be paying for this eventually.
Okay, Lisa?
I'd say option 2, don't give them a cent more than they've asked for and live to fight another day.
Option 2 is reduce fund balance just to make sure that what we project is no more than 800,000.
So I just want to be clear, so if there was an option 4, because there's 2 of you, I'm still at 3. I feel like the high school, because of the classroom sizes that we already are aware of, I'm comfortable with the high school, the reduction in that. The middle school, I'm holding strong to, however. So we're basically we're not even, we're like
All over the
2,
place.
1, 1, 1. So we'll have to kind of talk about that a little bit more. But when I do my quick math on my phone, so just do that. So if we were to, just to put the numbers out there, if we were to do option 4, so keeping the high school and the middle school staff, that would bring us at 600, a budget that we would bring to them at 680, 842.
Which would be 7.3% in taxation and 6.4% in expense.
Right.
Historically,
So it will be
what has happened if we haven't cut what they have asked?
Well, so, just to clarify, obviously, if I'm at the 6.3, then I would be more for option 3 at the 6.9%.
Yeah, I feel like cutting it down to 680 makes me like we're not, you know what I mean?
They asked for 6.5
No, they asked for 800.
or 800, and 800 is 6.5.
Right,
Right.
so with the teachers, just the middle school teacher saying we're at 6.9. So,
And what has happened historically? Have we ever not given them what they asked for? And what has happened when we have not?
I think it's been close. It's always been somewhat close, so like, not to keep advocating for what I want, but I just, that, the 746, 220 is close to 800. So that's why I say that, but, so I think what I'm hearing everybody say is that the option 1, which was going with the original budget, no one is in agreement of that. Right?
Melissa had
Melissa,
that.
you were, I
Melissa was.
apologize.
Yep.
Okay. So I guess we need to keep having some more conversation because we're still sort of 2, 1, 1, 1.
Well, 2 at option 3,
Yeah.
1 at option 2, 1 at option 4, and 1 at option 1.
Are you back down to me, to option 3, with keeping the middle school or no?
You guys are not going to like what I have to say.
Amy, can you go with explain your option again, please?
Sure. My option is all the amendments except for the last one. So we would keep the middle school teacher,
Okay.
and that would bring us to a budget that we would bring to the city council at $746,220. So that would be a 6.3 expense, 6.9 taxation.
And it would be adding in the 20, what we would be doing is, that number that you had of 746, 220
Yes.
is also adding in the 21,405.
Yes, that is adding in. So if you look on the list that says eliminate requests.
Subtracting it.
So, yeah.
Yep.
So we would add on 21,405, assuming that it is not going to be a teacher close to retirement, so they'll cost less, if that makes sense. So that's where, again, we get to the 746, 220. But it seems that Paul and John are holding strong, and that's okay with keeping the middle school and the high school.
So, yeah, and I mean, I always get nervous when we talk about cutting teachers and we talk about raising class sizes. Even at the high school, when we talk about, oh, there's, classes that have 9 or classes that have 8, or I don't think that we've done a deep dive into the reasons why and trying to figure out what the high school schedule is going to be. And I do.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I have a very, very hard time whenever we talk about raising class sizes, especially because of what teachers are dealing with right now and, all the needs that students have. That for me is something that is, I get nervous. So if there was a chance to keep both, I'd like to keep both.
I mean, like I said, I still think with what the city council had said, there was a mention of combined being at 8%. I just would, and then a vote as well. So, there's a concern that we end up back here because we're not doing, really come back around and have an adverse effect of what everybody's looking for. Really come back around and have an adverse effect of what everybody's looking for.
Can I ask, did we get an answer as to what happens if we don't bring
Well, we've done
what they,
we
just keep coming back and ping-ponging?
My understanding is we would just get their feedback tomorrow, and then we're back on Wednesday having another discussion.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, the city council could say, this is the amount. And this is the amount we're holding to, and now, school committee, we have to go back and try to figure out within that amount. I think we would come in and present, what we would in terms of where we are. There may be questions, I'm sure there's probably people who are following along and watching that may say, okay, if you're looking at 746,720 and they wanted to get to 800,000, how would we find that other 54,000? And, with that, we would talk about probably some of the things that we talked about that I think the committee has expressed some concerns about. And at the end of the day, they can then decide, I'm going to go with 746, or they could say, no, 800, or they may come back and say 845,000 with that. And we're not, there's not a lot of gamesmanship here. This is what we're coming back in to be able to look at, to see this is what we can provide that we feel is what's going to be able to come back and provide the best education for our students.
Now, technically, the city has to vote, but they have to vote on what the school committee, what the town council approves, or can we present something that they don't approve, and then the town gets to vote on what we've presented, even if they don't approve of it? It has to be, they have to approve it first.
They have to approve
Okay.
it.
Just
And
double
that
check it.
might be done where, those are the points that have been brought up. Melissa, you mentioned that. And that may be something that the city council comes back on. We have to remember that the last, I think, 4 or 5 budget referendums we've had have all passed between 71% and 79%. Now, we also know that each year it gets harder and it gets harder and it gets harder. So I don't want to come back and say, oh, that'll be a slam dunk. We've continued through those 5 years that we do get out to try to promote the budget. We get out to our various our people. I've spoken to Rotary, I've spoken to Kiwanis, I've spoken to the Trafton Center, trying to be able to say, hey, the budget's coming up and here's what you're getting to be able to do that. And we will continue to do that. But obviously there could be a risk here in terms of people saying it's not against anything against the schools, it is ultimately the bottom line number for that. So I don't want to speak for the city council. They could come back and we could present what we have. They could say, wait a minute, what would it look like if it was 800,000? I can present that. they can be able to then come back and be able to say if they're comfortable in terms of doing that, that number. And then they have to vote, and at the end, I don't think they're looking for a unanimous vote. They're just looking for what they'd be looking for, one, to have the majority. I did feel that after the presentation last Tuesday, you had a real good consensus there of, regardless of people being supportive of education, they were concerned about the impact on taxation and wanted to kind of bring that number down, which at the end of the day, they're elected. We're elected, you're elected for the schools, they're elected for the overall city in terms of looking at impact on citizens.
So Lisa, just to circle back, the last time we sort of heard what you were saying, you were at the 800,000 and no more.
I can support the 746, 720 at 6.9%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there any more discussion? Yeah. John, yep. Thank you, Lisa, yep.
Yeah, so thank you. I mean, because of the process, though, one of the reasons why I'm holding firm is this is the one chance that we get to say what we think, right? Where we're not, when it goes to the city council, I think those two positions are vital. And we went through that class size in the high school, right? And there was some scheduling difficulties, but it wasn't like, oh, hey, we have extra teachers at the beginning of the year. And some of those classes are small because they're more advanced, right? So world languages or math that I cannot do, calculus, those high-end maths, right? And so by nature, they're not going to have 25 kids in the classroom. And also, when we're talking about classroom size, remember that the bigger those classrooms, I haven't run a classroom myself. I've been in classrooms, but I haven't been a classroom teacher. Can we talk about, is there a correlation between classroom size and outcomes, for example? I mean, the larger the classroom, the workload, I'm assuming the workload's more, everything is more. And so we have to be, I don't want to speak for anyone, and I may be speaking out of school here, but we do have to be careful when we talk about those classroom sizes, right? And so this is for me, this is the one chance to say, no, I don't agree with their, $800,000 cut. And I think a lot of people in the community don't agree with it too. I think that a lot of people would say, no, keep that. 65,000 is not going to move the needle that much.
I do want to point out, and I'm not trying to be difficult, but one of the things I heard last week was the number of 800,000, I think, had some uniform interest, but there were people that say, I could be looking at less than that, but I think they were really zeroed in on the special ed assistant director. So now all of a sudden, you've got people saying that's kind of where they were coming in, and now we're going to come back in and also say, yeah, but we've got a couple more that we're valuing as being more important with that. And once again, the hope would be that the city council would value that opinion of people coming in to be able to do it. Now, I'm also going to be stating that that assistant director position is going to be looking at coming back next year. And so that also may factor into their thinking that if it gets back to, hey, we're not trying to tell you what to cut, but we also are trying to look at, trying to do our best, their best to support the schools, both in this budget, but also down in future budgets with that. So I had to say that because my feeling was that was anything about less than 800, they didn't know about the class sizes. They didn't know about these teaching positions. They asked us to say, go take another look at that and dig deeper into that to see if there's any savings coming back. We did, okay, with that. In our presentation of how we tried to prioritize those, we were now looking at them being, that's where we'd like to special ed next year and hang on to these teaching positions this year if possible.
Again, I feel like I'm going to be repeating myself, but you guys have done a tremendous job coming up with money and coming up with suggestions. The reason why I'm sticking with option 4 is because I think that's where the line is drawn for me, Lisa, is classes, what teachers have to deal with, what everybody that is working in our schools has to deal with, especially when, it's not like we have a lot of options right now between what the state demands that we do and what federal rules demand that we do and the amount of things that we have to, provide for our students. At this point, if we start cutting teachers and we start adding students to classes, I just don't see how we're not going to start buckling. And so that's why. I mean, and I think it's great that they come up with a number and you guys crunch and try to figure out what to do. But at some point, like, you guys do a really great job of working on is it a shoestring budget? Right? I mean, anytime that they say cut this, you guys are like, okay, well, the curriculum director can also be answering phones, and then, the superintendent can also be, I don't know, like, answering the phones too, and like everybody's doing, 5 different jobs, but at some point, there's only so much that you can do, so that's why I'm sticking with it. I think that's your point too, like at some point, you can't just keep asking and asking and asking. And so even if it's just a show of, this is where the line is.
So I'm moving to option 3, and that's going to be $70K next year, that high school position. So again, we know next year is going to be tough. I don't think we should be leaving anything that's going to make it any more tough, in my opinion, so. So what do we do with it? It's 3 of us, do we move on? Whatever, or we just, doesn't matter?
I'm trying to get a consensus just to be able to go and present something tomorrow that at the end of the day is the wishes of what people are and
Yeah.
doing that, so.
I feel like I'm swinging with 3 and 4. And I'm swinging because when I look at the middle school, and I know that you're telling us to only cut 21,000, but I really believe it'll be more that we get back from hiring, most likely, you know what I mean, like someone that's not, I would love for someone that's close to retirement, let me just put that way, with seniority and a lot of teaching abilities, but I just think the assumption is that most likely it's going to be someone probably newer, and I think that there's going to be more cost savings than 20 grand with that middle school, and so then it would bring that 680 up to 700. Yeah, so then it's like keeping a teacher for all the reasons why John and Paula talked about. This is tough. And I hear what you're saying about keeping the high school position, especially with next year. And Lisa, Melissa, you're both at number 3 with keeping the middle school but not having the high school, correct? You're strong at the number 3 of keeping the middle school teacher, the one that I had originally brought up. So the 746, 220.
Not necessarily.
Right. Well, we're at like a 2-3 regardless. All right, I guess just because of time's sake, and I think of just the good discussion that we've had, which, this is good discussion, and this is what we should be doing.
I'm worried that it's not going to fly.
Yeah, but then we can come, I mean,
Want to get rid of it, I'm not saying.
I mean, I'm hoping that they're watching and seeing the struggle is real, and that the struggle and the reasonings and, the education, you know what I mean? That we're wanting. So, all right, I'll go with option 4 for right now. So keeping the high school and the middle school, so presenting a budget to the city council tomorrow at 680, 842. Again, correct my math, because that's just me doing it on a piece of paper. So from what you had said, it would be a 6.4 expense, 7.3 taxation. And this was like basically a 2-3, not a unanimous decision. Right, so why don't we just, for technicality, let's just go around back to where the original vote is so that we're crystal clear. I am voting for option 4 at this moment, bringing the budget of 680,842, an expense of 6.4, taxation 6.3. That's where I stand today.
7.3.
7.3 taxation.
Yep.
I would vote for option 3. And that's still a 6.9% increase to taxation, which is more than I would originally stand on.
I am standing with option 4, tax at 7.3 and expense at 6.4, keeping both the middle school and high school teacher.
I am option 4 as well, keeping both the high school teacher and the middle school teacher. I think I think we've taken a significant amount off. $680,000 is not an insignificant amount to reduce the budget by, plus the $580,000 that we took off previously. And also when we talk about the taxation, that's last year's valuation.
Yes.
So we're expecting, and we can't use this year's valuation when we're doing this, but we're expecting this year's valuation to be better, which should help us out. And I'm not going to make any predictions because I don't want to do that, but if we could use this year's valuation, those numbers would look better, I think.
So I think, just to jump in there, if you look at the agenda tomorrow, I think they're going to ask us for recommendations. I will give what the wish of the school committee is, but then I think they start plugging in numbers. They start to be able, that's when we usually get to that point where you've come back with both the city and the school budget, where they can start plugging in some of those numbers to basically say, okay, what does that look like, and what is that impact going to be in the taxpayer? And then they might be looking at, are there any other opportunities to be able to lower that number with it? So that's what I would expect. I think I've sent you, you got sent the agendas, you kind of see how some of those pieces are. We're first, but we're first for a reason, so that we can be able to get pretty final in our budget. I think the city is pretty final already on theirs. They're going to have some additional funding through that privatization of the PFML, but that's not going to move the needle much, but it's not going to hurt with it.
All right, and Lisa?
The option keeping the high school and the middle school teaching.
Okay, so you've 4, and, yeah. Is there any more discussion about the budget? Okay, so tomorrow, just for a clarification, the budget meeting for the city begins at 5 o'clock?
Yep, City
Okay.
Council Budget Workshop right here in the chambers beginning at 5 o'clock. I know some of you have, I think, some conflicts where you might have to watch it streaming or
Zooming
it.
just because of work, yeah.
Yep.
I don't know, we can talk offline about that. All right, so we'll make a recommendation. Who would like to make a recommendation to adjourn this meeting?
Motion to adjourn?
Thank you. 5:49, all in favor? Okay, thank you so much, thanks for watching.